So welcome to the special edition. Special as in it's recorded one day after the last edition of the Attention Please podcast. So the last Attention Please podcast was the first podcast I had done on video, and the feedback ranged from the lighting is bad, I'm looking down, the video quality is bad, and some of the feedback was regarding the content itself. So it's a brave man. It takes a brave man to again put up a video one day after that. But I'm still going ahead because we've just seen the greatest capitulation of the US empire since Vietnam. I would say this is even worse than Vietnam because at least in Vietnam, the US wasn't there for 20 years and it didn't spend $2 trillion. As the scenes from Afghanistan, shocking though inevitable as they are, assail us from our TV screens, we see that nearly 20 years has passed and nothing really has changed. The Taliban is again on the ascendant, and pretty much the US engagement in Afghanistan has ended in failure. Now, this will be seen as Joe Biden's failure, but I would say that, and somebody on Twitter basically taunted me saying, are you still a bhakt of Joe Biden after this? And I would say, yes, I am, because somebody had to pull off the bandage. This war isn't Joe Biden's doing. Somebody had to do this. There was no other way this was going to end. Now, why did the US get into Afghanistan? Pretty much everybody knows why they did, but the actual motivation was essentially revenge. Now, this is kind of the old prison adage that if somebody comes into the prison yard and puts a knife into you, then once you recover, you have to go and find that guy and put a knife into him. Because if you don't, if you let that pass, then the second guy will come and put a knife into you. So the US had to defend itself after the spectacular attacks of 9/11, which no other country had managed, no other enemy of the US had managed to do. And so the US had to respond. And of course, they were not going to respond against the real people who were behind, which were a group of Saudi citizens. So they went after the easier target, which was Afghanistan. And of course, the Taliban also refused to hand over Osama bin Laden. So at that point of time, it made, I wouldn't say perfect sense, but it made sense for the US to go into Afghanistan, if for nothing else but to establish itself as the superpower. Because if somebody does this to a superpower and a superpower does nothing, well, it's no longer a superpower. So in a way, it made sense for the US to go in. But the objective was attained. And this again was something which Joe Biden mentioned today when Osama bin Laden was killed. This was essentially bringing somebody to justice or revenge, or however you want to put it. And that finished about 10 years ago. So what was the US doing for the last 10 years? Now, there's no really good answer for this. Some people would say, and the official version was that they were enabling the Afghani government to stand up against the Taliban. They were training them, they were arming them so that they can leave Afghanistan in a better position than they found it. This I've always felt has been the ultimate expression of colonial hubris, that Western powers feel that they can leave a place which is not in the West better than they found it. This has always been the excuse for colonialism. This has always been the facade for colonialism. When they wanted slaves, they called it the white man's burden. When they wanted spices, they said they wanted to civilize Indians. So this has always been part of the whole colonial narrative, that we know better, we need to make you better. So that essentially became the US narrative from after Osama bin Laden was captured and killed. Now, there's also the financial motive that, whenever there is defense expenditure, whenever there's infrastructure expenditure, especially in a foreign country, there's a lot of money which is being handed out in terms of government contracts to influential people and lobbyists. So there is a sound economic reason for an engagement in Afghanistan to have continued at the cost of the American taxpayer. And this is where I think Biden did the right thing by pulling the bandage, because this is just a drain on the American taxpayer. The money is urgently needed in other places. And most importantly, there has never been any kind of end game. And the Afghanistan papers, which came out a few years ago from Washington Post, showed that the American military establishment has essentially been fudging metrics in order to show that there was progress in the war in Afghanistan, that there was never going to be. And again, it stands to reason there is no progress here. There can never be any progress here. So what is, from the US point of view, it makes no sense. But more importantly is, did it make sense from the Afghanis' point of view? After all, it's their country. So what they feel is more important than what the US feels. So as the Pew research shows, that 99% of Afghani citizens want Sharia. Now, the 99% seems a little bit too much, but I was definitely going to say it's much more than 50%, which means a majority of the citizens there want a strong, rigid Islamic rule. And if you want that, then I don't think that for them, I mean, the Taliban may be reprehensible for us, but for them, for people who want Sharia to be the guiding principle of their communities, it has to be the Taliban. I mean, ultimately, they are Talibs or students, and they're the students of Sharia. So if you want if you want something really that much, well, they are the PhDs in a way. So why would they not want them? And you can see by the way that they have essentially won the country without bloodshed, essentially. When I say bloodshed, the bloodshed will happen now, but they have essentially rolled into the different cities without any kind of resistance from the Afghani army, which is what Biden said they would face a resistance. And again, I've read somewhere that people are afraid of the Taliban because the Taliban they do not obey by laws of engagement. They do whatever they want, and that's why people can't face up to them. Well, ISIS was similar to that, and the Iraqi army did fight the ISIS. They were butchered, but they did fight the ISIS. But there was absolutely no fight here, which meant essentially what I said in my last podcast, that there is significant amount of support for them. Now, many people would say, well, Afghani society progressed. I mean, there was a coalition of, none of them were Western liberals, but there was some kind of democracy in Afghanistan. But that was just a facade. That was propped up by American money. These people were all who were taking money from the Americans to essentially do a charade of democracy, a charade of liberal values, none of them. And if you look at what options do Afghani people have, if you look at what is the option other than Taliban? They are the local warlords. And these warlords, they're also strongly Islamic. It's not that they might be a little less than the Taliban, but they're not too left. They're not too center either. So there's not a lot of choice there either. So the local warlords are no better. They're actually worse than the Taliban. At least with the Taliban, there is a clarity of what they wish to attain. Now you could say Taliban are drug smugglers, they're gun runners, but the warlords, they are exactly the same. So the Taliban just represents a rather extreme and more simple to understand version of the other choices that the Afghanis had. This is a terrible position to be in, I would say. But what else were they really going to do? The moment the Americans left, so the moment, and the Americans were essentially paying them to keep up this charade of embracing some of the aspects of Western liberalism, like having a woman mayor, that was, again, you can see that it's gone within hours. There was no institutionalization. There was not even a little bit of change. Within hours, they have gone back to where they were in the 2000s, which just goes to show that this was just something that Americans were pouring a lot of money, and they were giving people money, and these people were doing exactly what they believed rightly that the Americans wanted to see. The moment the Americans said Tata bye-bye, that's it. All of it is gone. So again, and one more thing, some people were saying, well, will so many people support the Taliban, why are so many people trying to get out of Afghanistan? Why are they jumping on flying planes? Very disturbing footage there. And the reason is that, again, what I'm saying is that a majority of Afghanis support the Taliban. And again, the Taliban, and this is something which Imran Khan said, the Taliban aren't people who are coming from outside. They're not a foreign invading force. They are there in Afghanistan. They're their neighbors, brothers, uncles. I mean, it's a local force. It's not something which comes from outside. So, but still, there are people who are desperately trying to escape. And the reason why they're trying to escape is that for the last 20 years, the US and US-backed puppets have ruled. And the Taliban knows who they are, right? The Taliban isn't just interested in people who were, essentially politicians who were allied with the US. The notion of Talibani retribution runs far deeper. So anybody who's ever swept a floor in an American base and their relatives by the transitive closure all come within the umbrella of the Taliban revenge. So they don't make any distinction between them and the big guys, the guys who really took money from the US. They've all fled, of course. The ones that are left are the guys who are too weak and who don't have the money to. And that's the tragedy of the whole thing. And again, we might think of Taliban to be evil, and they are, but we have to understand that in the spectrum of the political choices that are available to people in Afghanistan, they are not much different from anybody else. And again, the people that are leaving because they are definitely going to be targeted by the Taliban. It's not a question of memory. The Taliban are local people. They know exactly who they are and who collaborated with the Americans. So, they can't, essentially Mukul Roy or Babul Supriyo their way out of this mess that they have gotten themselves in, unfortunately. And they should have known that the Americans were going to leave. It was 20 years, and now the 20 years are gone. And the only thing that I think that the US should do, though I'm pretty sure that they're not going to do, is they should really take in a lot of Afghan refugees, not just the ones that they directly helped, but essentially all the people who are seeking asylum at this point of time. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're not, but it's honestly the only right thing to do at this point of time, given the mess that they have created in this place. And to conclude, finally, and you feel terrible for the people of Afghanistan, especially that, especially women who are going to be the main principal focus of Taliban hate. But the thing is, ultimately, no one can fight the battle for you. It has to be a battle that the Afghanis have to fight if they really want to get rid of this noxious philosophy of the Taliban. And it's shown. I mean, we just saw it. They just do not want to fight that. So 20 years, multiple trillions of dollars, and then capitulation within hours. The message here is loud and clear. This was a war that could never have been won because there was never really anyone fighting the war in the first place. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.